All right, and we are back for the Prometheus Deep Dive, a CNC podcast. Today, my co-host again is Michael. Michael, thank you for coming on, and definitely thank you for coming on last moment. How you doing?
Good area.
I'm doing fine. Just tired as usual. So let's kind of get right into it. We're going to talk about the boot. Let's talk about the good stuff. So obviously, this episode we saw that Sam went home. And we did see that leading up to that, there were definitely a couple names that were thrown out leading up to that temple. So, what did you think about the Sam boot?
So I was actually like incredibly shocked. Going into that game, I thought, and being on production and picking the cast, I in no way thought Sam would be a pre-merge boot, like at all. And even going in like after that challenge, I in no way expected her to be going. So that was shocking, not only on production side of it, but even like rewatching it and how it happened exactly. Just yeah, crazy. But it made it for a very entertaining leading up to Temple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this episode in general, there was a lot of content to cover. Now, generally speaking, with the exception of like one or two things throughout this season, while I was editing, I didn't really want any of the episodes to actually be that long. But there was just so much content that had to be tackled. And I mean, in addition to the content that didn't even make it in the episode, there was still, I mean, having all the content and then boiling it down to content that I liked and then boiling it down into the episode. I mean, that's 45 minutes worth of content. And then there was another 35 minutes worth of content that I really liked that I had to then boil down to an 8-minute episode of On the Cutting Floor. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, there was just no way that I could really shorten this any further. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I was genuinely shocked when Sam got out because I wasn't really expecting her to go pre-merge, just like you said. I mean, there really wasn't a lot of people that I thought would go pre-merge anyway, but definitely Sam was a big shock. You know, she's a very, very social player. And obviously it's her being very social and outgoing, bubbly, whatever, was not the reason she ended up getting out anyway. But yeah, it's a shame that Sam did get out this episode.
Well, and it's not just that, it's also the fact that it was also kind of in the game itself. Like you have Caitlin, who was an hour late. You have Lauren, who, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment, but she majorly messed up that challenge. Um, and then you have David, who's getting haircuts. So like Sam, it just kind of like, but I mean, like I said, it made for an entertaining leading up to the temple and temple itself. It was very on your edge of your seat kind of thrill.
Yeah, and I mean with Sam, I mean I kind of get it. I do kind of get where they're coming from, but I mean granted, I'm not some super veteran of any of these games, but there's a part of me that would be like she's a new player
Mhm.
and she might or she seems like she's going to stick with loyalties. So if I scoop her under my wing, she'll be loyal to me. But I also get the fear coming from someone like Caro and David and Zach, where they're kind of like, hey, if something happens, we're going to need to stick strong so that way we could try and make it at our strongest point to the merge or to a tribe swap or whatever. And I mean, I get that. But we did see in the beginning of the episode, David did actually want to continue to work with Sam.
Right.
Um, I believe David might have been leaning more towards Caitlin, which then we also saw later that Lauren also wanted to work with Sam. She really likes Sam. And I think Lauren's train of thought was that Sam would potentially be a pawn and, do whatever she wanted. Which is, I mean, it's a good train of thought to think about. And I mean, we even going back to the very first episode of the season, when, all the people were getting introduced, Sam herself even said, hey, look, these people have the advantage because they are very experienced, but I also get the advantage because I can kind of play that up. And I think that definitely was part of her strategy. But we also saw in this episode that she was trying to start to propel her game a little bit forward. And she threw out the David thing. I don't think it was super strategic on her part. Like this was some sort of master plan, but it
Right.
also was just like, okay, the Tiki thing was hard enough. So I don't want to have to deal with that again. But also at the same time, as she did say, David's just doing stuff. He's pretty much the entire game up to that point been running out places,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's like, he kind of already sat out the one challenge because he's running out places. So like I get where Sammy was coming from. She was the first person I think to officially actually throw out a name to vote for. Whereas before that, everyone else was just discussing the names.
Right. And honestly, I don't know, thinking back on it, I kind of feel like she kind of was. I mean, if I was in the game with them, I probably would have gone with the way Sammy was thinking, because why have David as a major part of your alliance if he's not going to be reliable, if he's not going to be able to participate in challenges, if for some reason he's out of service and can't vote with you? It's, to me, that's a little too risky. And I think she was right. If he had gotten voted out there and then, it would have been no hard feelings kind of thing, probably out of anyone. But yeah, so I see her reason and I actually agree with it, but it just sucks that votes piled on her instead.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. I mean, I would definitely be on the same train of thought, especially given that it's a mini, and in a mini, you need to make sure that your team is like attentive,
Yeah.
like you can't, because the game goes so quick. So I mean, like you could go into a grocery store, and I mean, how many times have you gone into like a Walmart or a Target or whatever your local grocery store is, and you lose service like in the middle of the building or
Right.
whatever,
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's very unfortunate. But yeah, let's kind of like dial back. So as we already talked about Sam's vote out, we saw that during the tribe life before the temple that there were a number of names thrown out. So the very first name that was thrown out for possibility was Lauren. Then it very quickly shifted to Caitlin and Sam, and then the last major name that was thrown out was David.
Right.
So let's talk about Lauren.
I mean, Lauren fucked up. Like, without a doubt, she is the reason they have to go to Temple. Um, I mean, and it's crazy too, because the other team, Mara specifically, also really fucked up. But even with that, they still pushed ahead. So, I mean, I kind of get the fact that if you see Lauren good for your game, you don't want to vote her out necessarily. And because it is a mini, it moves very fast. So this tribal dynamic won't last too much longer. So ultimately, I don't blame them for not voting her out. But I mean, it still puts a target on her back.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, we already have a number of instances too, as we saw in the beginning of the episode, as we saw in the previous episode, as we saw actually just pretty much throughout this entire episode. In addition to her messing up, she has already made people a little weary about her.
Right.
Because she comes off, I mean, she is kind of a straight shooter and she comes off kind of strong. She comes off very strategic and very smart. Now, it's funny, in this episode, you had two very different reactions to her gameplay. You had the Zach kind, where Zach was fangirling over her and is like, I like her. I like this. This is the type of person I want to move forward with. And then you also have the Caro side, where she's just like, yo, she's kind of scary. She's kind of intimidating. I don't know if I can trust her. Yeah, she might be like straightforward, or seemingly straightforward, but also given how smart and strategic she is, she could also be saying, something else. And I don't know where I want to go. And so it's funny that you had those very two different reactions to Lauren's game.
Right.
So, but anyway, moving on to Caitlyn, I really personally don't think there's a whole lot to touch upon Caitlyn.
No, I mean, at this point in the game, I think she's made up for that hour, for that missing hour. Like, in a sense, sure, it could still be a target. But I mean, at this point, if she didn't make these social connections, then sure, that could still be a thing. But last episode clearly showed us that she did. So I can see why she was still, her name was thrown out there, but it in no way surprised me that she didn't get voted out.
Yeah. And I think at this point in the game, so like the game each day is generally about 8.5 hours long. And at this point, they're already more than halfway through the day. So I mean, yeah, she's the further she makes it through the day, the less her being late really weighs in on the game, as you're saying. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, was it a factor? It was a little bit, mainly because I believe it was Zach who had said that Caitlyn, he didn't interact that much with Caitlyn, whereas Caitlyn's main interactions were with Lauren and Caro.
Right.
So we also kind of already talked about Sam, bubbly, social, new player, so there's not that strategic side. She did the best, I guess, with the exception of David. I don't remember exactly what David's time was. I just remember he actually did get his quick, but his was still submitted after the fact. But Zach and Sam had their times the fastest, but she's the first one to drop in the bottle challenge. So, I mean, there's all these trade-offs about who messed up in one challenge versus who messed up in another challenge.
Right.
Um,
Which
so
Lauren brought that point up, you know, why should I get sent home just because I sucked at a puzzle when I could be good at something else?
yeah,
And I agree with her on that.
and it's a fair argument. I mean, I think you can see a number of instances both in her confessionals and at the temple and her actual one-on-one interactions. She's very good with her words. She can articulate her thoughts and strategies very well,
Yeah.
which clearly potentially saved her in this instance. I mean, not that really, once again, her name was this major thing, but it was like something that was discussed for like 2-3 minutes, and then they moved on to, well, who do we know the least? And that's how it shifted to Caitlyn and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then the last person is Dave. Well, actually, we already talked about David too. Yeah, I mean, you have any more to say about David, really?
No.
Yeah. I mean, so those were the choices. Now, with that, something that didn't make the episode, and I don't even think it really made the on the cutting floor episode either, was the final decision actually happened within like the 30 seconds leading up to them actually entering the temple. You got a brief like snippet of it where Lauren, Caitlyn, and Caro were all in a room together,
Right.
right at the very end. But obviously, like them making the final decision, it couldn't be in the episode, because if it's in the episode, it kind of gives away, not
Yeah.
kind of, it does give away who's going home. So that was actually really interesting that even happened, and the fact that they kind of like pushed Sam out real quick so Kara could come in literally in the final seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a very interesting tribe life. I think just in general, it's kind of one of the few times pre-merge that everybody actually pretty much openly discusses everything.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting how people were bouncing from one room to another. But it's also really funny because, and maybe I have a little bit more knowledge on this versus the actual people in the game, but I actually feel like some of them really don't have the best poker faces. Just kind of looking, I think the two biggest ones, kind of really listening and looking at David and Zach, their reads or tells are a little bit easier. I mean, there's at least one very clear instance where like they think they're coming up with a plan and they ask Zach, and he like really clearly just stumbles upon it and tries to dodge by saying, well, I gotta go talk to the other people to see what they think. Well, the person we just threw out as a target is also in that other room. So like,
Right. Yeah.
and then it's hard to describe David's tell, but it's this face that he makes, especially in this region. Just look at the bottom portion of his face, more specifically his mouth. He cracks like these sharp smirks. That's the best way I can describe it.
I'll have to look out for that.
Yeah, he does it a couple times, and he even especially does it in his final thoughts speech right before they officially did the vote. And so like David has a very subtle tell, and I don't know, it could be the fact that I've just been staring at this footage a bunch of times. It could be maybe that I can actually read him very well, or maybe they just have really shitty tells. I really don't know.
I mean, I don't think I've noticed this, so it's probably because you've gone through like the footage so many times.
Maybe I'm really not sure, but it's just kind of interesting. So moving back a little bit, we also saw, just to kind of make a note, we did see that David originally wanted to work with Sam, which was kind of funny. But David hasn't really been trying to push a strategic gameplay. So I'm very curious how that would have potentially worked out had Sam not thrown David's name out there. But it's also very, very, very interesting that this is the third instance where both tribes, who obviously do not have communication with each other, who are not in the same rooms, happen to be talking about the same freaking thing. Like last week, there was a lot of musical theater talk.
Right.
Both tribes happen to be talking about a lot of musical theater. This episode, they both were anticipating a swap. It's just really funny how that works out.
Right. But I mean, the swap makes a little more sense than the coincidence of musical theater. Just because, you kind of expect it in these games. It's almost usually a given. Especially when you're kind of that low in numbers at that point, you're expecting that swap like 2 to 3 rounds before merge would happen. So I don't blame them for thinking that. But I'm glad it didn't happen because I really like the tribe dynamics.
Yeah. And it's also very interesting. And as they even say many times, they all really do get along. Like they get along really well. There was no, pettiness or people trying to backstab people, like it was very interesting how both tribes have been getting along at this point. So yeah, kind of moving on. Let's just actually move into the Ember Award, because I think we kind of actually covered most of the stuff that pretty much happened. So moving on to the Ember. Oh, actually, I do want to make another note because I don't think I actually said it earlier, but it was kind of just emphasizing on Lauren messing up. Yeah, she it's funny actually how everybody at the tail end of each of the tribes managed to get their stuff done pretty quick. Even if Lauren would have managed to finish hers 30 seconds earlier, David would have potentially quickly finished his thing before Colin.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this was so long ago at this point, but I thought I remembered David submitting his 15 seconds after Colin did.
Yeah, it's 10 to 15 seconds. It's really not that long after Colin submitted his.
And Colin got it in fast too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, oh my God. Granted, those puzzles weren't meant to be that hard. They were meant to be relatively easy. When I play tested all of that stuff back when I originally created the challenge, I purposely made them normal difficulty, so it would generally only take about 1 to 3 minutes. I think my time for the jigsaw puzzles were a minute. The slide puzzles maybe were 1.5 minutes, but there was a couple people like Lauren, for instance. It took her, I think, over 5 minutes to finish that jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, yeah, she would have just finished it a little bit sooner. Plus also Anna, which there was a little bit of a deleted scene where like Lauren is continuously freaking out about the whole thing, and then like they kind of ask me about it, and I'm like, I can't like give her any specific answers. All I could really just tell her is that like you don't have to rotate the puzzle pieces, like it's all there, I can assure you. But
Yeah.
then Anna actually chimed in, and Anna chiming in could have actually propelled Lauren forward a bit,
Yeah.
which means that if Anna probably didn't help Lauren, who knows if David would have even gotten a chance to do the slide puzzle.
I mean, if Lauren ever got the help and she really, really messed that up, she could have been the one who went home that night.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there was already people starting to, feel a little bit uneasy about her. So,
Right.
but anyway, yeah, let's move on to the Ember Award. So for those who don't know, who haven't, listened into the previous podcast, the Ember Award is kind of the like MVP, the player of the episode. Everyone's got their own, different criteria on who they think deserves it. But generally I go for the person who, really was that MVP, who made the right moves, who did, A, B, C, and D to position themselves the best. So we'll actually start off with you, Michael. Who deserves the Ember Award?
I would give it to Caro.
Okay, why is that?
The reasoning is that she received that information from Sam that David's name was being tossed around the most at that point, which it was. She was in a room with David and Lauren, or was it David?
I think it was Zach.
I thought it was another girl.
Oh no. Yeah, it was Lauren because Zach was with Caitlin and Sam.
Right. That being said, she could have received that information and said nothing because David was in the same room. There wasn't a reason really to say anything. And the vote could have just went Sam's way, in which that case, it would be Sam getting the Ember Award tonight. But, she used that connection she had with David to bring this up, and somehow within like 15 seconds got the whole rest of the tribe to vote that way. So yeah, I would give it to her. Once again, I feel like on the Titan tribe is ultimately the centerpiece in that major alliance.
Yeah, for the Ember Award, I would also give it to Caro. I agree. I think she is at the center of the tribe right there. My one fear, because a number of the confessionals did not make it into this episode, there was way too much content. And the confessionals were a little bit more absolute because they were recorded after the initial tribe life. So I really couldn't put them in without it being obvious. Plus, I think, like I said, 80% of everything was actually discussed like in their tribe life. So yeah, with Caro, my thing is that she was the centerpiece. I think at this point in time, she does not know. I'm fairly certain she does not know actually how much power she has in the game.
Right.
Caro could swing one way or another and manage to keep all of the players with her and going any way that she wants.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we see that the true three for Caro at that point, or the closest thing to the true three, are actually David, Zach, and her. But there is also another one that she pretty much just as equally likes, which is Lauren, Caitlin, and her. So that's another three, with Sam as the possible add-on to their alliance for like this all-girls alliance. And then once again, she's under their wing. She could potentially be a pawn for them. While also with Caro too, Lauren could potentially be a shield because she seems outspoken. She seems like the leader of the tribe, so on and so forth. But once again, there was a 30-second like snippet right at the very end before they went to the temple, and the decision actually came down to Caro. Lauren started to realize how much she was speaking up about things.
Yeah.
And so Lauren had to reel it back, but she even says in that like 30-second snippet that she does kind of want Sam to stay because she thinks that Sam will do whatever they say and she'll be loyal. Caitlin still is not really in a position to dictate anything. She has gotten herself in a good social position, but not quite in that position yet to make any sort of power moves. So it really comes down to Caro. And Caro's like, I don't know if I can trust Sam, but also her two closest allies are David and Zach. So
Right.
Caro had all the power. Caro made the final decision. Caro is a huge reason, if not the pretty much primary reason Sam is gone. So
Yeah.
Caro 100% deserves that Ember Award.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, anyway, yeah, I think we've pretty much wrapped up on everything. So do you have any final thoughts before we conclude?
No, I'm just really excited to see the next episode. Obviously, right now we have Caro as like the player to watch out for, but I think we have some power players rising up on both tribes actually. So we'll see who wins out in the end.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you could please share this, that'd be greatly appreciated too. And on that note, everyone have a good night. Bye.
Bye.